Hey, welcome back to Way of the Wrench, and on today's very special episode, I'm going to show you everything you need to know to be able to paint your virtual pinball cabinet. Stay tuned. So the very first thing we have to talk about is that the overall quality of the paint job you're going to do is only going to be as good as the prep that you put into the cabinet before you start painting. Now, if you haven't watched it already, I'll put a link above to the video that I made on how to fill all the holes and sand and get this thing ready for paint. I highly recommend you go watch that first. That way, when you're done your paint job, it'll be ooh la la, magnifique. All right, so the really big question of the video is what kind of paint should I be using to paint my virtual pinball cabinet? Well, there's a million ways to skin a cat. What a gross saying. Like, first of all, who's skinning cats? And who got bored of skinning cats the traditional way and came up with many ways of doing it? Anyway, what I'm trying to say here is that there's many ways and many different factors that determine what kind of paint you're going to use. So it could be down to what can you paint inside your house because you don't have a garage or outside to do it and you can't have smelly fumes inside the house. It's going to come down to budget. What can you afford? It's going to come down to tools and equipment. What do you have to be able to put the paint on? And it might even come down to, can you get the paint, right? Different countries get different paints. So maybe we should start with what did they originally do when they were making pinball cabinets back in the day? Now, with the original pinball machine manufacturers, it really boils down to how can they give you a good product and yet still cut some costs and time. So what they did is they didn't paint the entire cabinet. They wouldn't generally paint the inside of the cabinet because nobody sees it. They wouldn't paint the underside because nobody's looking underneath there, and they wouldn't paint underneath the vinyl artwork. So that saves a lot of money if you think about it, how much surface area that needs to be painted. So what they would do is paint only the areas that you would be seeing that didn't have any vinyl artwork. So all the corners and edges and parts of the back box that didn't have any artwork. Now, it's not a bad option. However, I do warn you that if you are putting vinyl down on the sides here and you haven't done any kind of sealer or primer or kind of wood filled or bondoed these surfaces and sanded them smooth, you're going to start seeing all that wood grain popping up through your vinyl artwork. So make sure you deal with that. Now, if you did go an MDF route, technically MDF's got a little bit of kind of clear coat on the top surface. So if you were to sand that smooth, it might be okay. But realistically, it's not been coated, not been painted, and MDF and plywood eventually likes to absorb moisture. And over 30, 40, 50 years, this cabinet might not make it. So that's one option for you. Now, a lot of virtual pinball cabinet builders do a traditional oil-based paint for their cabinets. And there's a whole bunch of pros and cons, but the big pro is that once you have let it fully cure and off gas, and you give it a sand probably to about 400 grit, and give it a good wipe down, you are going to have zero issues with your vinyl sticking to it or sticking long-term and peeling off just because of the type of paint that you've put down. So for that reason, I'm going to be using oil-based so that I can make sure that doesn't happen. The other pros, it's tough as nails once it cures up. It's got some great wear resistance, and it is a sealer. So there's not a lot of pores in the paint to allow moisture to get into the wood over the long term. Now, there are some cons though. So one con would be that it takes a lot longer for it to dry. In fact, it's about a week or two to fully off gas and cure. So if time constraints are an issue, that might not be the right paint for you. The other one is it can be smelly depending on the paint. So my primer that I'm going to put on is actually odorless and it's wonderful. The second one is going to be smelly. Now the other one is oil-based is a little bit grosser and harder to clean up. So you're going to have some paint thinner or mineral spirits to be able to clean up all your tools and your hands and any drips, as opposed to water-based where you would just take it to the sink and wash it all up. And did I mention you can get like a gallon of Rust-Oleum oil-based enamel for like $50? I think that's pretty good value for your money. And the oil-based primer I'm going to use is literally that. It's a primer. It is getting this surface ready to stick to whatever top coat I pick so that I don't have the top coat just peeling off later on in life. Now, it's a sealer, so it's literally going to cover up any kind of stains or any kind of blemishes or knots or whatever's in there. And it is sandable, so once I've got a nice thick coat or two on here, I'm going to be able to sand this dead smooth and get it ready for a perfect top coat. And the other thing that I really like about this is it's odorless and it's white. It is super bright white, so I'm going to actually be painting the inside of the cabinet that white color. That way when we're working on inside the cabinet, it's going to be all lit up and look beautiful. Now, another paint option for people that don't want to deal with the oil-based paints is to switch over to water-based paints. Now, they have their own pros and cons. So the first pro I can think of for water-based is that it is dead easy to clean up. You just go to the sink and use water. They're generally odorless and they're generally faster to dry, which is all great. However, the big con for water-based paints is that if you buy the wrong one, when you go to stick your vinyl artwork on, it literally won't even feel like it's sticking to it, or it will stick to it, and then over the next couple of days and weeks, you'll have bubbles appear, and then the vinyl literally just starts to peel and fall off. And I can't imagine that happening after spending all this amount of work and spending $300-400 on vinyl artwork for that to happen. So that's why I went with oil-based. Now, rather than me come on here and say this is exactly which water-based paints that you can use and have 100% success with, what I'm going to do is I'm going to get you guys, anyone who's got a bunch of pinball cabinets that you've built and you've had great success and you have years on these things and their vinyl is sticking great, I'm going to get you to put it down in the comment section below, and then what I will do in 3 months, 6 months, a year, I will kind of give the top 5 recommendations for paint as given by you guys so that people can try those and have some success. Now, that being said, I have had some discussions with some other virtual pinball builders in the Facebook group. One of them has used a DTM, or a direct to metal polyurethane, and had some good success. I've heard of people using clear polyurethane, and you don't even have to spray it or brush it. You can literally put it on a rag and you wipe the surfaces down. And if you do that method, you're going to have all the little wood fibers kind of puff up and swell up. So that will require you to sand it once that's dry, and then give it a wipe and give it a second coat. But that's some good success there. And I've even heard of people not really wanting to paint, but they want to seal the wood and have a good surface to stick the vinyl to. So I've heard of people doing a 5-to-1 ratio of water to wood glue, and mixing it up really well and using that as kind of like a sealer coat and then sanding that. So lots of options. You could even just switch over to laminate and glue down laminate so you don't even have to deal with this. So maybe in a future build I'll show that kind of stuff too. Now keep in mind, I'm approaching this project from the point of view that I am putting vinyl artwork on. So if you were deciding to save some money and not do vinyl artwork, then go ahead and paint whatever you'd like, and I would highly recommend that you go for the water-based just for ease of use and cleanup. Now the next big thing is, how are we getting our paint and putting it on our project? Well, we've got all kinds of options. We've got paint brushes, we've got rollers, we've got airless sprayers, we've got HVLP spray guns. And let me break it down for you. Now, the most accessible way to paint your cabinet is going to be using brushes and rollers, and there's nothing wrong with that. In fact, when you look at these cabinets, there's huge flat surfaces where a roller would make really quick work and do a great job. And maybe one of the downsides with paint and rollers is that you end up with brush marks and roller marks, but you're going to end up having to sand that dead flat for the vinyl to stick anyway. So, not a big deal. On the inside though, in the corners and the edges, is where you're going to have more brush stroke marks, and you're going to have a hard time sanding those out because they're in the corners and the edges as well, so that your top coats don't look bad. So that is a downside. Now, if you are going to do this route, I highly recommend you don't cheap out and get the cheapest brushes and rollers. Spend a little bit more money, because I've had some brushes that are so cheap that the bristles literally fall off and stick in the paint and you're constantly picking them out. Or the rollers, I've had rollers literally come apart in the oil-based paint as I'm painting, and that's no fun either. If you want to see what I'm talking about, I will post a link to the painting of the arcade cabinet where I learned all of that stuff. Now, if you're like me and you've done your fair share of brushing on paint and using rollers in your life, and you're looking for something that's a little easier and has a nicer finish when it's all done, you might want to start looking into something like this, which is an airless sprayer. Let me show you what I got. Now, when I was doing my Raspberry Pi arcade cabinet build, I got tired of sanding out brush marks, and I knew it wasn't going to be a good enough quality for my overall end top coat that I wasn't able to sand after. So I went out and I spent 150 bucks Canadian, and I bought an airless sprayer. So this is a Wagner airless sprayer, and it does water-based and oil-based paint, and it does a really good job. If you'd like to see how it turned out, I will put a link up to the video for painting the arcade cabinet. You can check it out yourself. Now, when I bought this, I told myself that I am only going to use this for water-based paints, and the reason why is that water is a lot less harmful on all the seals and mechanisms inside this sprayer, and you can do a really good job cleaning it and spraying it through to make sure it's all clean. Whereas oil-based, you can technically do the same thing. You just have to use something like paint thinner or mineral spirits and clean it well and spray it through. But that stuff is going to be hard on the seals, and it won't last long term. And the other big problem is that when oil-based paints start to dry up, so if you're in the middle of a project spraying lots of parts and you let it sit too long, it starts to dry inside the gun, and then next thing you know, this thing is not working, or it's spraying horribly and gooping paint all over the place, etc. Now, the most expensive way to paint something And the most professional way to paint something is using a high volume, low pressure spray gun, otherwise known as an HVLP gun. Now, the gun itself is not the most expensive thing. You can get these things down to $20 American, so that's not too bad. It's the air compressor that's going to be the big cost in here. And you can't just go out and get a $50 compressor that you use for filling the air in your tires of your car. You need something that is big enough that has a certain amount of cubic feet per hour to be able to supply the air that you need when you're spraying. Now, I am in an automotive shop, so we have a compressor, so that's what I'm going to be using here to do the final spraying. However, if you guys don't have that at home or available to, you can rent them from your local tool store, and maybe a buddy has one that you can loan as well. So let me show you what I got. So this HVLP gun is a DeVilbiss, so it's a little bit more expensive, but they're all basically about the same thing. So we've got 2 guns in here, 2 paint cups, cleaning equipment, we've got a little pressure regulator to bring shop air pressure down to what the gun wants, and some various tools for cleaning and adjusting, etc. So this is the setup I'm going to use for spraying my cabinet for the final top coats, and I'm going to be able to teach you guys at the same time. Okay, next step is to find a place where you can paint for the long term. Make sure it's got some good ventilation, especially if you're dealing with stuff like the oil-based paints. And while you're at it, why don't you throw some craft paper down? That way you have a clean area to be spray painting or painting, and you don't have stuff going into your paint. And at the end of the day, when it's cleanup time, you just tear it off the table and crumple it up and put it in the recycling. Pro tip, when you're trying to paint these pieces plus the edges, it's really quite awkward to do that when it's down on a flat surface. So you can go out and buy these little painter standoffs so you can put your projects up off the table, and it makes it a lot easier, so you get the edges and then just do the second side on another day once it's dried. Now, you don't have to buy these. You can also just make up some wooden blocks around the wood shop to be able to elevate these pieces. Okay, I've got pretty much everything ready to paint. Now, the last little thing you do before you start painting is making sure that these surfaces are clean. So clean of any of the dust that we've been making with the sanding process. And one of the best ways you could do that is to pick yourself up some tack cloths. It's basically a cloth that's really quite sticky, and you just wipe the surfaces with it. And if there's any kind of dust, it'll pick it up. Make sure that there's nothing going to prevent that paint from sticking down. And you can see there's a little bit of dust on this rag already, so good thing we're doing this. All right, before we start painting, I can already foresee there's going to be some comments like, oh, must be nice to have an electric HVLP, or must be nice to have a shop compressor and an HVLP gun to spray. I guess I'm just going to roller and paintbrush my stuff like a poor person. And I'm going to have it the other way too. Hey, why did you just use rollers and brushes when you can use all your HVLP that you had for your arcade cabinet, and you got a shop and a shop compressor? Why aren't you using that stuff? So rather than hear all these comments, I think what I'm going to do instead is I'm going to do a little bit of everything so you get the best of both worlds and get to see it all. So on these flat panels and things like that, or maybe even just the first coat of primer, I'm going to use the brushes and rollers. And then later on in the project, when I'm painting, I'm going to be doing the other stuff as well. So you get to see it all. So for the first coat of primer, I'm going to be using the Zinsser odorless oil-based stain blocker. I've used this stuff before on my Raspberry Pi arcade cabinet, and it is amazing stuff. It literally does not smell. Once it dries, you can sand it really well, and it coats pretty much everything in one coat. So really nice product. Now, before you use this, make sure you give it a good shake and a good stir, and let's get going. All right, off camera, I'm gonna finish priming all these little side trim pieces, and then that'll be it for the first coat for the first side. So the second side, I'm just gonna flip over and do it off camera as well. All right, everything has one coat of primer on it with the roller and the brushes, and it looks okay. You know, it's painted, and it was pretty easy to paint. I didn't have to wear a dust mask. Took a little longer than spraying wood, but you know, if that's what you have, that's what you have. Now, a couple things that I want to show you that why I would not recommend using brushes and rollers for your final coat is some of this stuff. Let me show you. So when you're trying to paint the edges, I would recommend doing those first because you're going to have a little bit of slop kind of come over the side that if you're quick enough, you can get this surface and kind of smooth it out. Now I didn't, and you can see there's a little ledge here of kind of dried up paint that when I went to go do this coat, it didn't smooth it out. Now this isn't going to matter at all because we're going to sand this flush for the next coat. But that is a problem when you're doing with the rollers and brushes. Now the other thing, and I'm not sure you can see it very well, is with a roller, no matter what you do, you're still going to get a textured surface here. And if this was for vinyl, it would not be good. However, like I said, we're gonna be sanding this down. So for this coat, it does not matter. But if you're doing your final coat that you're gonna be looking at on your back box, keep in mind that this is what the surface finish is gonna be like. So take a look at it. If you don't like that, then you're gonna have to figure out how to get some spray done for the unvinyled part of your back box. And if you're doing the brushes and the rollers, then just keep in mind that the paint is gonna drip every now and then, even though you're being careful. So I'll put some plastic down, a tarp, some cardboard, just put something down unless you don't care about the surface on the ground. All right, now follow your paint's instructions on the outside of the can, but mine says that it's dry to the touch within 30 minutes, which it is, but it says you have to wait 2 hours to recoat. Now, as it is today, I am unable to continue today, so I'm gonna have to wait probably 2 days now, and that'll be more than enough time for this to cure up and dry, and then I can lightly sand this, probably with something like 220 or 320 grit, and then I'll reevaluate whether I need to put another coat on or just continue with the top coats. So, see you in 2 days. Now, whether you use the orbital sander and have to move really quickly so you don't burn through this primer coat, or you use the quarter sheet palm sander and it takes a lot longer, all you're shooting for is a nice smooth surface to the feel. And the edges, when you go to do them, I would not use either of those. Use a sanding block and go by hand. The other thing you may notice is that when you go to sand your first coat, you may notice that the wood feels kind of fuzzy. And what's going on is that first coat of paint, whether it's oil-based or water-based, will tend to puff up and swell up the little fibers on the end of the wood, especially near the edges. And so when you go to sand that, it's going to feel really fuzzy. So that's really important that we want to sand this first coat nice and smooth to get rid of that, and then that shouldn't happen again. Now, it tends to happen worse with water-based paints, but it still happens with the oil-based as well. So I'm going to continue off camera and finish all the rest of these. Whew, that was a lot of sanding, and it instantly reminded me why I did not want to do brush and rollers anymore and only spray. But I did it for you guys. So this is all the sandpaper I had to go through for doing the hand sanding blocks around the edges. And I ended up using mostly the orbital sander. But you have to be very careful because with a fresh sanding disc, it goes right through. So you have to move it real quick. And then really after one side of a panel, it starts to kind of get junked up. And then it slows down how fast it sands off. But you still go through those as well. So now to clean all of this up, blow all the dust off, and get ready for the next paint. Now, because I'm in a shop with a compressor, I used an air wand in my hand to blow off all the dust off all the sand components. But for you guys at home, you can just use a vacuum cleaner with a bristle attachment. And then after that, before you start painting again, you're gonna wanna hit it again with a tack cloth just to make sure there's no dust on there. And then, depending on what colors you're picking and what you're kind of doing, you may want to start doing some masking. So let me show you what I mean. Now on my cabinet, I want the inside to be white so that I can see things easier inside when I work on it. And I want the outside to be black so it matches my vinyl artwork. Now I can't have the two mix or have any overspray, so I'm gonna have to do some masking. So get yourself some masking tape or some painter's tape, and get yourself some clear painter's plastic sheeting and a pair of scissors, and you're gonna mask off whatever you don't want to be painted. So the next step we're gonna do is our black Rust-Oleum oil-based paint for the outside. So I'm going to mask up a line on the inside to make sure that nothing goes in. Now I'm gonna use a line of reference kind of just where the monitor would be or just a little bit below. Everything else under that is gonna be white, everything above is gonna be black. So let's get masking this. right, now everyone's HVLP spray gun is going to be slightly different, so follow your instructions with your gun. Now, the first thing I want to do is change the size of the fluid nozzle and the paint needle, so that's really easy to do. And it basically is, the size of your needle depends on what you're spraying. And so since we're doing that pretty thick Rust-Oleum, we want the biggest one there is. So there's a little built-in wrench here, counterclockwise, spin the fluid nozzle out. And then back this screw out, which is your fluid control. And then you can take out the needle like that. Now this is the original small size. This is the big one that I want, which is 1.5. So take the one you want, slide it back in. Put the fluid control screw back in. And then pick the right fluid nozzle for the size. There should be a stamping on both of them, and this one says 1.5. Screw that in by hand to make sure you haven't cross-threaded it. And then give it a little snug tighten with the wrench. Okay, and then you can put this on. This is your air cap. And before you fully tighten it, you can actually adjust where you want the fan to be or the spray pattern. So if you want the spray pattern to be up like this, leave it like that. Or if you want to turn it 90 degrees, you can adjust it like that. Okay, the other thing I want to do is put on the regulator here, and for this gun it wants to be regulated down to 30 psi. That way it'll give you 10 psi for the paint cup. Now when you're trying to set one of these guys up and you have no idea what you're doing, it's not a bad idea to just use some water so you can actually play with all the fluid nozzle and the fan control and get it dialed in, and then run some solvent through it real quick, and then you're ready to start painting and you know everything is set up. So take your paint cup, spin that on. Just hand tight, you don't need it crazy tight. Pop the lid off, top it up with water or your paint, whatever you're doing. And then put the cap on. Okay, let's go test this out. All right, now to set this up, the top knob is your fan control. So this is what adjusts how the spray is coming out of the gun. So whether you have it like a target bullseye circle, or you can start stretching it out to like an oval or even more like a fan shape. Now we kind of want a fan with slight curves on the side so that we can have some overlap and have some good coverage. So all you do is you spray this out. So right there is all the way in, that's your circle bullseye. As you back it out, you'll see that start to shape to go a little bit wider. And I want it just right at that point where it starts to get to the biggest point, and then that's it. And then the knob right underneath, second from the top, that is your fluid control. So this is how much paint is coming out. Now, if you have it all the way in, it actually restricts how far the lever will come back, and you will have no paint, just air. And then as you kind of go counterclockwise on it, you're going to start seeing paint appear. And the further out you get, the more paint you're going to have. Now, if when you're doing your painting, you're finding that it is dry instantly and it looks kind of grainy or gritty, that is not enough fluid. It's just drying instantly. So creep up on the paint. If you find that you're getting runs and just too much paint's coming out, then you're going to want to back that off and put a little less paint. So like this. All right, so closed up all the way, that is just air. And now you go counterclockwise to start adding paint. And there you go. Okay, so now we kind of have to spray it on something and try to fine tune adjust it. And I do not recommend you go right to your cabinet to do that. What I would do is hang yourself up a piece of cardboard, and because we're just using water, you should be able to see it. And you can adjust your pattern so it looks exactly right and the right amount of paint before you start. Now, when you do this, there's some other tips. You want to be about 6 to 8 inches away from the surface, And you always want this to be perpendicular to the surface that you're spraying, so not excessively up like this or down, because the one side will put more paint than the other side. And same thing when you've got a long surface to do not do kind of like a swinging motion, because it's only perpendicular right in the middle, and at the beginning and in the ends you're starting to bring it away, and it's going to have some issues with consistency. So a better tactic is 6 to 8 inches, come off the part a bit, start your spray, and then move across like this until you're off the part, and then let off the paint. So something like this. And then when you go to do your next pass, you want a bit of an overlap, roughly 50%. Like that. So practice till you got this nailed in, and then dump the water and start switching up to the paint. All right, before we start mixing paint and get going here, a couple other things I want to talk about. Now, where you go to do the actual painting is up to you. You can go really quite picky and make yourself up a big spray booth using plastic sheeting and like an old kind of tent, or just do it in your garage. However, you have to keep in mind that when you start spraying your gun, you're gonna have some air going around in the shop, and so if you haven't swept the floors or vacuumed the floors up, you may shoot dust onto your paint. And the other thing is, when you start spraying, you're gonna have some overspray go off onto other things in the room. So if you don't wanna get your garage or your house or wherever you're spraying dirty, hang up some plastic sheeting, and it'll be well worth the time to keep it all clean in the end. Now, the other thing is, when we're spraying, we want to be wearing a respirator with some filters that are good enough to handle the chemicals that we are spraying too. So a regular dust mask is not going to be good enough. Make sure that you got a well-ventilated area, and make sure there's no sparks or flames or open heat sources or anything like that, so you don't blow yourself up. All right, let's get all ready and have some fun. All right, when you start mixing paint and get going, you're going to want some stuff. First one is some disposable gloves so that you can take these off and throw them away, and cleanup is easy peasy. All right, you're going to want your paint mixing cup so that you can thin your paint down with acetone so that it is exactly the same consistency and ratio every single time you mix it up. And if you've never used one of these, so the first thing you do is you look at the ratio that you're trying to use for your paint and thin. So for right now, we're going to use the 6 to 1. And then out of the 3 columns, you pick the one that you want the amount of paint that you're going to mix up. So we're going to go to the 3rd column, which is the largest. The first number is going to be your paint. So we're going to fill up paint to number 1 line. And then for a 6 to 1 ratio, we're going to fill up to the 2 with acetone. And that'll give us that much paint at a 6 to 1 ratio. Okay, and then you got your paint. We've got our Rust-Oleum semi-gloss black. You could also probably have satin black if you wanted. We're using an oil-based enamel. And this stuff has been sitting for who knows how long, so it's probably separated a bit. So give it a good solid 5 minutes of shake. Take the lid off, give it a good stir before you do anything with it. Okay, because we are going to be thinning it down to spray, we're going to be using acetone like it says on the actual can itself. And like I said, we're going to do a 6 to 1 ratio with this. The acetone is going to make it spray easier, and it's also going to make it dry a little faster, which will be also very cool. You can also use this for cleaning up after, or you can use paint thinner or mineral spirits as well. Okay, stir stick for mixing up your paint. Make sure it's a nice clean one. Now, one of the drawbacks of using oil-based paint is they can take forever to cure. Now, this product here is called Japan Dryer, and you put a little bit of splash of it in here. You just read the instructions for how much you put, just a little bit, and then what it does is it helps speed up the dry time. Now, I'm not sure if I'm going to use this time, but I'm getting you a little heads up. Those of you that want to have this dry up a little faster, you can take a look for this stuff called Japan Dryer. And with oil-based being kind of like a chore to clean up, we're going to have some used thinner or used acetone to dispose of after. So you're going to need kind of like an empty container so that you can put that stuff in there while you're cleaning up. And I'd have a rag handy so that you can do any little drips on the floor or whatever with some acetone or paint thinner so that you can clean up as you go. Okay, and while you're at it, I would get one of these paint screens. That way, once you're done mixing your paint, before you pour it into your gun, you can put this on top, pour it into here, and it'll filter out any chunks of paint so that your gun won't clog up or that they won't make it through into your paint.
Okay, and then when you're all done, you're going to put a little bit of mineral spirits or acetone. If there's any paint, pour it out into the can. This one I just ran dry in the gun. Give it a good shake, clean out the paint can itself, and then put it back onto the air and spray it all out. And then when you're all done, we'll disassemble it a little bit just to make sure all of that is cleaned up inside. And then put a little bit more in, give it another rinse of the cup so it should be nice and clean at that point. Give it a final spray, and then we'll wash all the internals. Ooh. All right, to clean the gun out so it'll work great for you the next time, we got to disassemble a bit. So we got the cap, paint cup, which should be pretty much clean, but we're going to clean a little bit of other things here. Take off the air cap. All right, take some acetone or some paint thinner or mineral spirits, whatever the can says for cleaning up. Now we're going to do a little bit of washing here. This is all just to make sure that it works good the next time you go to use it. Really spraying with the gun with the acetone in it, it's pretty much clean. This is just an extra little bit to make sure you don't ever have any issues. You spend a lot on your tools and it's a good idea to take care of them. That way they'll last a long time. Especially when you're buying premium stuff. If this was a $10 Harbor Freight gun, well, maybe you could just throw it in the garbage, but this one isn't. Alright, and put it back together. Okay, and if I didn't mention it before, there's a little hole here that you can poke with a needle. Make sure that's cleaned out, otherwise it doesn't let the paint drop and you'll have issues painting next time. Alright, now this stuff here, get your used empty container. You can dispose of this later in life. I'll just pour it in there for now, and you can just top it up until it's full, and one day you're going to take it somewhere to recycle it. And the last thing is these rags. Once you've done your final cleanup, at the end of the day, this is a major fire hazard. So do not just ball this up and leave it in your garage. You're going to burn your house down. What I would do personally is let it air out. That way it doesn't have any spontaneous combustion where it'll start on fire by itself. Allow it to dry up. And if you're really worried, you could even just put it outside of the house in an outside garbage can. Dispose of it so that you're not going to have setting a fire to your house.
All right, everything that's supposed to be black in the cabinet has one full coat of that Rust-Oleum oil-based paint. Now, for all the extra effort and cleanup and smell and length of time waiting for it to cure, that took 1.5 quarts to do all the pieces that are black, pretty much the whole cabinet. And at $15 a quart, that's like $22 to paint the cabinet. That is some good value for your money, and it looks really nice. So on the can, it says 24 hours till it's fully dry. I don't buy that, maybe possibly because I put the acetone in, but I would give it more like a week. And if you can hack it, maybe even 2 weeks before you touch the stuff again. If you're gonna do a second coat, I would wait that week or two, give it a light scuff just till it kind of looks a little dull looking with probably 150 or 220 grit, and then give another wipe with a tack cloth and then another second coat, and then that should be ready for vinyl just about. All right, it's been 3 days since I painted the cabinet, and it is now dry to the touch, and it is so smooth. It looks amazing. It's got that perfect kind of semi-gloss luster to it. Now, I was a little concerned that it was only going to be one coat. However, I found an inconspicuous place, and I literally rubbed it with my fingernail for about 30 seconds. I can see where I scratched it, but it didn't go through, and it feels really quite tough. So I'm actually thinking I'm going to leave this at one coat, and I'm still going to sand this to 400 grit so that the vinyl will have something nice and smooth to go to. And if it starts to break through at all and I see white, then I'm going to put a second coat. But at this point, it looks like it's only one coat. So I'm going to start finishing up the other parts that needed the other side painted. And then we'll start unmasking this and I'll show you that. Now the only spot that I did have a little bit of runs on is right here on the front panel where I was trying to spray the paint inside of all of these little holes in here so it made sure it covered. And then when I sprayed the panel, it put a little bit extra paint. So not a big deal. Remember, this is all going to get sanded anyway, so I'm just going to sand that down flat so we don't see it through the vinyl, and that should be no problem. All right, that is a good 30 minutes or so of wet sanding. That's dead smooth, and you will know when you were done this point because it will have that dull gray look everywhere. There won't be any little shiny spots, and it will feel like glass, dead smooth. Now, this probably should have a second coat because I did break through into the primer. However, you got to keep in mind there's also vinyl going on top of this. I think I'm going to leave it like this. But if you've got way more of this poking through, maybe you did a thinner coat than I did, or you just have some extra paint and lots of extra time, then go ahead and do a second coat. And then you're going to have to redo this wet sanding so that you have a dead flat smooth surface. But this is what you're looking for. So I'm going to go ahead and do the sides of the cabinet as well. Awesome, it's really flat, so there's not going to be much to do. Smooth as glass. Oh, don't kid yourself, this is a lot of work. I still have the other side to do, and I think that one took me about an hour, hour and a half. And I'm doing this all by hand with block and just the final little touches with my hands. Because if I did an orbital sander, I think it would just blow right through. So, but it's going good. Just got to put in the work. All right, so when do you take the mask off in your painter's tape? Well, the real answer is when the paint is dry to the touch. However, there's no real right answer because if you're doing a second coat, then do you really want to mask again? And that kind of thing. If you take it off too early, you're going to have paint running into where you didn't want it to. If you take it off way too late, the paint can actually start sticking to what you masked it to underneath, and that can start lifting up. And if the paint is really hard and quite brittle and you've left it a long time, when you peel off the painter's tape, sometimes it'll chip off the paint. So a little trick, if it's been too long, is take a razor blade and just very carefully slice just next to where the painter's tape is. That way when you peel it off, there won't be any chip out. So let's take this mask off now. Sweet, that looks great. Not a single tear out and no primer lifted up at all. So, and that was 3 days, so just for your own reference. Looks amazing. Well, while we're waiting for this stuff to dry, why don't I show you how to use the electric HVLP. That way, if you want to do that route, you can. And we will start painting the stuff that's supposed to be white, white. All right, so I'm going to put a top coat over my primer because after a bunch of years, it may go chalky on me if I don't do a top coat. So what I'm going to use is some semi-gloss white paint that I had left over from some housework that I was doing. And I'm using some interior acrylic latex. And I thought, why not show you a third method and use my electric HVLP gun. So I'm going to get this mixed up really, really well and strain it out and put it into the gun, and I'll show you that. So I'm going to thin this down 10% just so it sprays out a little bit easier. So I've got graduated scale on the side, so I'm going to fill it up to 1,000 milliliters and then add 100 of water. Give it a little mix. And I'll probably give it a little shake once I got it in the gun as well. Now, when you go to add the container to your gun, keep in mind that you've got a nozzle here, and which way are you going to be spraying? I'm going to be spraying more like this, down on a table. So I want this to be facing down to the bottom corner edge of that paint container. You can turn this in case you're doing ceilings or something like that. So where you were going to be going like this, and you're going to want the pickup tube to be the other side. So make sure this is the right direction before you start. Okay, and then the electric part, at least on this gun, goes in like this, kind of 90 degrees from it, and then you turn it until it clicks and locks in. So let's go do a test spray and see how this looks. Okay, just like the air HVLP, the electric one is pretty much the same stuff, just slightly different. So watch your electric cord that you don't drape it across your freshly painted stuff. You've got an air power control here. You've got the material flow adjustment knob here. You've got the width of your spray pattern right here. And you've got your fan direction control on the very front. So just consult your owner's instructions for your sprayer. And like I said, get a test sheet and do a couple sprays. Get it dialed in here before you start on your project. Now we're going to wait for 4 hours for that coat to dry, and then we'll put on our second and final coat for the white. Now in the meantime, I'm going to dump this paint back into another container, and I'm going to rinse and wash this all out, because if you leave this for 4 hours, the paint inside the gun's going to stick, and there's even some little stuff on the end of the thing here that's going to make its spray pattern really gross for you. So we're going to clean this out, and best thing, just go to the sink and use water. Okay, and then when you get it all cleaned out, fill this up with a bunch of water and spray it with under power so that you can clean out the inside. Now it's good for next time. Some other things that need to be painted is the playfield and back glass monitors. They have this shiny metal bezel on here that I don't want to see from certain angles. So I'm going to mask up the screen very carefully so don't spray paint that. Give them a scuff and a clean, and then I'm going to spray paint them with Rust-Oleum primer and paint all in one. It's a semi-gloss black, so it should match exactly the cabinet. And I guess this is even a fourth option for you guys at home. If you want, you could use spray cans for your entire cabinet, but keep in mind it's probably the most expensive way to do this because these are running about $14, $15 a can. And I would say you'd probably need at least 10, 15 cans or so to do a whole cabinet, but it is another option. And while we're at it, let's spray paint the speaker grills and the LED strips. And it's a wrap in another video from Way of the Wrench, this time on how to paint your virtual pinball cabinet and get it ready for vinyl, which very next video up is going to be doing that, and I'm going to get to show you guys what I ended up picking for artwork for that. If you have any questions or concerns about anything we did in the video, put them down in the comment section below and I will help you out as soon as possible. Time me. I'm really good with my subscribers and their comments. If you haven't already, why don't you join us on Instagram, Way of the Wrench. And until next time, take it easy.